Every American should take a close look at the official hearing footage now appearing on screen. Representative Kamlager-Dove delivered a sharp accusation against Secretary Marco Rubio, calling this the most corrupt administration in history. But the controversy reaches far beyond missing financial records. Watch what unfolds when she presses him for answers about Venezuela. Stay with us until the end to hear the crucial question that never received a response. Watch now.
5 months ago, you essentially became the new overlord of Venezuela, taking control of the country's oil revenues and giving foreign companies access to its oil and minerals. But you have provided no real transparency about where the money is going and who is benefiting from this arrangement. I want to now talk a little bit about Mauricio Claver-Carrón. So, Mr. Secretary, you've known Mr. Claver-Carrón for many years, correct?
I don't know how many years, but sure.
Okay. We know that he was special envoy to Latin America. He's also a former lobbyist who supported your presidential campaign, I think in 2016. And now he runs a private equity firm that is seeking $1 billion in investments in Latin America. Apparently, he is seen as your right-hand man on Venezuela. But he's not a federal employee, and he's not bound by rules about financial disclosures or conflict of interest. According to the Washington Post, he acts like a kingmaker in Venezuela, helping to determine which private companies get contracts and access. And that's concerning because in January, you gave confidential licenses for Venezuelan oil to a company that had been charged with bribery by the Department of Justice and employs a trader who gave $6 million to Trump's campaign. Some have said that Mauricio is the Jared Kushner of Latin America, but Mauricio has said that Jared Kushner is the Mauricio of the Middle East. So who is Mauricio, and why is he riding on private jets to Caracas with executives from firms trying to get contracts? And why is he texting Delcy Rodriguez on the regular? Who is he working for?
Okay.
I'm going to allow you to respond. I'm setting this up because it looks unseemly that essentially you are taking Venezuelan oil money and sending it through a network of campaign donors, corrupt politicians, and lobbyists, and we can't get any documentation on that. We don't have any receipts. So the question is anyone from the administration, directly or indirectly, benefiting from the contracts being doled out in Venezuela?
Is this where I get to answer?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Number one is the number of people. Mauricio is one of many people that are involved in what's happening in Venezuela. There's not a day that goes by that we don't have someone who's interested in what's happening in Venezuela for a variety of reasons. Nor is he the only person in the United States that directly contacts Delcy Rodriguez and others. There is a stampede of people that want to be involved in Venezuela. Mauricio is one of many, but by the way, not involved in Venezuela. I am not knowledgeable or know of any financial links he has to anybody in Venezuela.
So I'm going to reclaim my time, Mr. Secretary, but I'm glad that you said that. Because you have said these things, you have shared these talking points before.
They're not talking points, they're the truth.
But it is hard to take your word for it when this is the most corrupt administration in American history.
Well,
we're talking pardons for sale.
The most pivotal moment of the congressional hearing is beginning now. She openly outlined allegations involving no-bid contracts and a $1.8 billion slush fund, immediately setting a tense atmosphere throughout the room. But Representative Kamlager-Dove was far from finished. If you want the unfiltered truth behind these foreign oil decisions, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. How much longer can the government avoid addressing these missing details? She then turned the discussion toward the real-world consequences, including regular text exchanges with Delcy Rodriguez.
For sale, we're talking about no-bid contracts to those on Trump's family and friends plan. We're talking about a $1.8 billion slush fund. And I think that's corruption. The American people think that's corruption. They want to know if you think that's corruption.
Okay. Number two, this goes right to the point of transparency. You're absolutely wrong about the way the money flows. It's pretty straightforward, and I'll share.
So I'm going to have to reclaim my time again because
the
what
kind of process is this? They get to ask questions and you don't get to answer?
It's my time. The question
I don't know
about
about
corruption
you. When is it my
really
time?
important.
So why am I here if I don't get to answer your questions or your defamatory
I'm
statements?
reclaiming my time, Mr.
I want
Chair.
you to, but I want to reclaim. Well, do I get time? Because you make these defamatory statements and no one can talk here.
If you can't call out corruption in this country, then how can you call it out in another
Well, I can't say
country?
anything because you won't let me
That is the
speak.
question. It is about credibility and your credibility. And your credibility meter is on empty right now. This
See,
oil.
these guys
who
just get to talk and I don't get to
Who
answer?
determines the barrels of oil that get sold? How
But you
many
won't
of
let
them?
me
At
answer your
what
question.
price
I have an
does it
answer
get
for your
sold?
question.
Where is it going?
Oh, I get it.
will
They
let
have to
you.
use their time for me to answer
The
your
onus
question.
is on you to
a
prove
joke.
that there is no corruption happening.
Well, how do I
That is
prove it if
your
you don't let me talk?
responsibility as the Secretary of State. And you know what? Normally we would have access to that data. That's the
You do.
transparency.
You just don't know where to
But you're
look.
not showing us any receipt. Well, then show us.
But
Do you
you won't.
commit? Do you commit to coming back here with whoever the person is who is monitoring the sales of the oil? Bring them before this committee.
Can I
Show the
reclaim my
receipts.
time?
Have the documentation. You don't have this time yet. I am talking about your credibility and evidence, not your talking points, because talking points are never a replacement for transparency
I agree,
and
but that's what you're saying. You're saying
documentation.
talking
And
points
we
without
have
an
not-
answer.
We are 5 months into this and no audits. Zero visibility into the
100%
contracts that are
false.
awarded.
100%
Zero
false.
Unfortunately,
transparency about where the
Representative
money
time has
is
expired.
going.
Representative Salazar is recognized.
And giving contracts with no transparency
Can I
is
borrow your
exactly
time
the
to
reason why
answer?
you shut down USAID. So practice what you
Did you notice the official defense that just unfolded? Rubio firmly insisted that the process is already transparent and that the relevant information is publicly available. Yet instead of identifying exactly where that information could be found, he relied on a familiar verbal response. In doing so, he avoided addressing the fact that this arrangement had already been in place for 5 months, without any audits and with very limited public visibility into the contracts that had been awarded. When a federal official under oath cannot immediately direct a congressional committee to the appropriate public records, the issue extends well beyond an ordinary political disagreement. It paints a much broader picture. Representative Kamlager-Dove entered that hearing fully prepared. She did not rely on broad allegations or general criticism. She arrived with specific names, precise financial figures, and a clearly defined institutional concern that she had evidently been examining for quite some time. Mauricio Claver-Carrón, the $1.8 billion fund, the oil licensing arrangement, private jet trips to Caracas, and text communications with a sanctioned Venezuelan official were not random accusations assembled for dramatic effect. Each point represented a distinct piece of evidence supporting a much larger concern. And Rubio appeared to recognize that. That is precisely why his initial hesitation stood out. Watch how he begins to respond before abruptly changing course. Well, okay. Those were not the words of someone simply searching for the right phrase. They suggested someone who quickly realized the prepared response was no longer sufficient. He appeared to have expected a more general question, but instead he was confronted with a level of detail that demanded a different approach. The question involving Claver-Carrón deserved far more attention than it ultimately received, because it was structured with remarkable precision. Kamlager-Dove first established the relationship. She pointed out that he was known to Rubio, had supported his campaign, and now leads a private equity firm seeking approximately $1 billion in Latin American investments. She then highlighted the central concern. He is not a federal employee, is not required to file financial disclosures, and is not subject to federal conflict of interest regulations. Yet, according to the Washington Post, he has been operating as a powerful behind-the-scenes influence. She then presented the supporting details: private jet flights to Caracas involving executives pursuing contracts, along with regular text communication with Delcy Rodriguez. Delcy Rodriguez deserves particular attention. She is far from a minor political figure in Venezuela. As the country's executive vice president, she is one of Nicolas Maduro's closest allies. She has been under U.S. sanctions since 2018, and the European Union also sanctioned her in 2020. Citing actions that undermine democratic institutions. The fact that a private American citizen with no official government position was reportedly maintaining regular text communication with her while also advising on which companies would receive Venezuelan oil contracts is exactly the type of situation that conflict of interest safeguards are intended to address. Kamlager-Dove was not making an emotional appeal. She was pointing to what she described as a structural accountability gap with significant real-world implications. Rubio's response regarding Claver-Carrón was notable not because of what he addressed, but because of what he left unanswered. He stated that Mauricio was simply one of many individuals involved with Venezuela. That may be true, but it did not actually answer the question. No one had claimed Kamlager-Dove was the only person involved. The focus was on this individual, his unique level of access, and his specific financial interests. Rubio then stated that he was not aware of any financial ties Mauricio Kamlager-Dove had with anyone in Venezuela. That wording was notably precise. He did not say that no such financial connections existed. Instead, he said he was not aware of them. Those are two very different statements, and in a hearing room filled with people who closely follow these issues, that distinction was unlikely to go unnoticed. Then came the moment that shifted the entire tone of the hearing. Kamlager-Dove declared, "This is the most corrupt administration in American history." She delivered the statement plainly, not as political theater, but as a direct assertion. Rubio answered just as calmly, responding, "Well, that's your opinion." What stood out most about that exchange was not the language itself, but how quickly it unfolded. Neither person hesitated. Neither noticeably raised their voice. There was no dramatic reaction. Instead, it felt like two individuals who had already engaged in this broader argument many times before, or at least understood the positions they were expected to defend. From that point forward, Kamlager-Dove broadened her focus. Rather than concentrating on a single individual, she began describing what she argued was a larger pattern: pardons allegedly being sold, no-bid contracts benefiting individuals within the president's inner circle, and a $1.8 billion slush fund. Viewed together, these were presented as more than isolated controversies. According to her argument, they reflected a system in which official government authority, including pardon powers, contract approvals, and, in this instance, licensing access to a foreign nation's oil revenues, was being exercised in ways that benefited a specific group of private interests. Whether those allegations amount to legal corruption is ultimately a question for investigators and the courts. But as a presentation of Kamlager-Dove's claims, the argument was structured, organized, and unmistakably direct. Rubio attempted to push back. He insisted she was completely wrong about how the money was handled and maintained that the process was straightforward. He even began to say that he could show her the evidence, but he never had the opportunity to do so. At that point, the hearing became as much about procedure as it was about substance. Congressional hearings operate under time limits that many viewers outside Washington often find frustrating. Each representative controls their allotted speaking time. They may reclaim it whenever they choose, including interrupting a witness before an answer is complete. This is not an accident, but a deliberate feature of the process. The 5-minute rule exists because experienced witnesses are often skilled at using lengthy responses to consume the available time. A confident answer that lasts nearly the entire allotted period can prevent additional questioning just as effectively as a direct response. Members of Congress who understand this often reclaim their time specifically to avoid that outcome. Rubio's frustration with the procedure appeared genuine, but it also deserves consideration. He repeatedly asked when he would have an opportunity to respond, arguing that he had come to answer questions but was not being allowed to finish his answers. From a personal standpoint, those complaints are understandable. Procedurally, however, Kamlager-Dove was exercising the authority granted by the committee's rules. She was using the time allocated to her to ask the questions she believed needed to be addressed. Rubio also had staff, prepared statements, and other public platforms available to explain his position beyond the hearing room itself. The discussion surrounding receipts and documentation reached the heart of the hearing's central issue. Kamlager-Dove asked who determines which barrels of oil are sold, how those sales are priced, and where the resulting revenue ultimately goes. These were not theoretical questions. Venezuela's oil industry is currently operating under a framework involving U.S. licensing authority, meaning the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control has a role. Yet decisions regarding which companies receive licenses, under what conditions those licenses are granted, and how the resulting revenue is tracked still involve significant discretion that remains difficult for the public to fully examine. Her central argument was straightforward. 5 months into this arrangement, she claimed there had been no audits, no publicly available contracts, and no transparent accounting showing where the money ultimately went. Rubio firmly rejected those claims, calling them completely false. He argued that the information was publicly available and suggested that she simply did not know where to find it. That is certainly one possible defense. However, it is different from identifying exactly where those records can be accessed. If the information is publicly available, directing a congressional committee to the appropriate source would ordinarily require only a brief explanation. That never occurred during the exchange. As the hearing entered its final moments, two additional issues emerged. First was Kamlager-Dove's comparison to USAID. She argued that awarding contracts without transparency was precisely the type of conduct the administration had previously criticized when justifying actions involving USAID. It was a pointed comparison. The administration had publicly argued that foreign assistance programs suffered from waste, fraud, and inadequate oversight. Kamlager-Dove turned that reasoning back toward the Venezuela oil arrangement, questioning why the same expectations for transparency and accountability should not apply there as well. The second development may have revealed the atmosphere in the room more clearly than anything else. After Kamlager-Dove's allotted time expired, Representative Maria Elvira Salazar, a Republican from Florida representing one of the nation's largest Venezuelan American communities, stepped in. Rather than challenging Rubio, she offered him additional time and encouraged him to reset the tone of the discussion. Speaking after the formal exchange had concluded, Rubio abandoned the restrained language he had used earlier. He described the hearing as a clown show and a dunk tank. His reaction sounded less like carefully staged political messaging and more like genuine frustration from someone who believed the hearing had been designed to create damaging headlines rather than to obtain meaningful answers. That leaves the central question lingering long after the hearing ended, and it is not one with an easy answer. Was this a legitimate exercise in congressional oversight that Rubio avoided by declining to provide direct responses? Or was this a carefully structured political confrontation intended to generate a memorable soundbite rather than meaningful accountability? The available evidence lends support to aspects of both interpretations. Kamlager-Dove raised legitimate questions about significant gaps in transparency. Rubio appeared to have substantive responses but was not given enough time to fully present them. Both of those observations can be true at the same time, and each reflects something less than flattering, one about the administration's approach to oversight, and the other about what congressional hearings have increasingly evolved into. What the hearing ultimately failed to answer were the fundamental questions at the center of the controversy. Who is actually responsible for overseeing the oil revenue arrangement in Venezuela? Who conducts the audits? Who ensures that the companies receiving licenses are complying with the conditions attached to those licenses? And if they are not, what enforcement mechanisms are in place? These were not questions Kamlager-Dove invented for political effect. They are the kinds of questions any serious oversight body would be expected to ask when examining an arrangement of this magnitude involving a sanctioned country, its state-owned oil company, and a network of private firms seeking access to valuable contracts. Rubio maintained that transparency already exists and argued that she simply did not know where to find the information. If that is accurate, then the most straightforward way to settle the matter would be to bring before the committee someone who could clearly identify the public records, explain the audit process, and demonstrate exactly how the money moves from the sale of oil to the accounts that ultimately receive the proceeds. That is precisely what Kamlager-Dove requested. She asked Rubio to bring the individual responsible for overseeing the oil sales before the committee. Rubio laughed. She laughed as well. Neither appeared to believe that such a hearing was likely to happen. In the end, the central issue remained unresolved. 5 months into an arrangement involving the oil revenues of a sanctioned nation, a $1.8 billion fund, private citizens with no official government role advising on contracts, and a network of companies with complex political connections, one basic question still lacked a clear answer. Where is the money actually going? According to the exchange during the hearing, the answer remains somewhere the public has yet to clearly see.